It was a dark and stormy night when my two friends, John and Rachel, and I decided to go on a hike to a nearby trail. We had heard rumors of a beautiful lake at the end of the path and wanted to see it for ourselves. As we set out on our journey, the sky grew darker and the wind began to howl. We knew we had to hurry if we wanted to make it back before nightfall. The trail was narrow and winding, and the dense forest made it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead of us. We had to be careful not to trip over the roots and rocks that littered the path. Despite the weather, we were all excited to reach the lake and see it for ourselves. As we got deeper into the trail, the wind grew stronger, and the trees began to bend and sway. We knew we had to be careful not to get lost or separated. We held on to each other tightly, determined to make it to the end of the trail together. As we approached the lake, everything changed. The wind died down, and the sky cleared up. The lake was even more beautiful than we had imagined. It was surrounded by tall trees and rocky cliffs, and the water was so clear that we could see the fish swimming in it. We were all amazed by the beauty of the place, and we couldn't wait to explore it further. But as we were admiring the lake, my friend John suddenly disappeared. We searched for him frantically, calling out his name, but there was no sign of him. We were forced to turn back and report his disappearance to the authorities. The next 2 days were a blur of worry and fear. We searched the woods, talked to the park rangers, and even contacted the local authorities for help. But there was no sign of John anywhere. We were all starting to lose hope that we would ever find him. But then, on the 3rd day, John was found wandering aimlessly in the woods. He was disoriented and confused, and he couldn't remember a thing about what had happened to him. But that wasn't the worst of it. He was different. He had changed. His eyes were dark and haunted, and he spoke of strange and terrifying things that he had seen in the woods. He told us that he had been walking around the lake when he saw a figure standing on the shore. He thought it was one of us, but when he got closer, he realized that it was something else. It was a dark, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. It reached out to him, and he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. That's the last thing he remembered before waking up lost in the woods. We were all terrified by John's story. We had no idea what could have caused him to see such a thing, and we were all starting to wonder if we were in danger. We decided to leave the trail and never come back. But even after we left the trail, we couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had followed us home. John's disappearance and strange behavior had left us all with a sense of unease and fear that we could never quite explain. We tried to go back to our normal lives, but we couldn't forget about what had happened. We were all haunted by the memory of the lake and the shadowy figure that John had seen. We couldn't help but wonder if there was something out there, watching us and waiting for us to return. We never went back to that trail again, and we never spoke of it again. But the memory of that dark and stormy night stayed with us forever, reminding us of the terror that we had experienced and the unknown that still lingered. John's behavior never returned to normal. He started to have frequent nightmares, and he became more withdrawn, becoming more of a recluse. He was unable to hold down a job and eventually moved away. Rachel and I tried to keep in touch with him, but he never wanted to talk about that night or the lake. Years passed and I became a successful businessman, but I couldn't shake off the memory of that night. The image of the lake and the mysterious figure always lingered in my mind. One day, I received a call from Rachel. She told me that John had passed away in his sleep. He had never fully recovered from the incident, and it seemed that the memory of that night had consumed him. I felt a pang of guilt for not being there for him, for not trying harder to help him. I decided to go back to the lake to confront my fears and to pay my respects to John. When I arrived, the lake looked as beautiful as it was that night, but this time, it was not dark and stormy. I walked around the lake, and I felt a sense of peace, as if the lake was trying to tell me something. I realized that maybe it was time to let go of the past and move on. But as I was leaving, I saw something in the corner of my eye. A dark figure standing on the shore. It had glowing red eyes. It reached out to me, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I woke up in my bed, unsure if it was a dream or not, but I knew one thing for sure: I would never be the same again. As the years passed, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was still following me. I would see dark shadows out of the corner of my eye, and I would hear strange noises in the middle of the night. I couldn't help but wonder if the figure from the lake had somehow followed me home. I tried to brush it off as just my imagination, but the feeling of unease and fear never left me. I became increasingly paranoid and found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, convinced that something was following me. One night, I woke up to find a dark figure standing at the foot of my bed. It had glowing red eyes, just like the figure John had described. I froze in terror, unable to move or speak. The figure reached out and touched my forehead, and I felt a coldness seep into my mind. I woke up the next morning, and I couldn't remember anything about the previous night, but I knew that something had changed. My nightmares increased in frequency and intensity, and I started to have vivid memories of the lake and the figure, memories that I couldn't explain. I knew I had to go back to the lake to confront my fears and to find out what had happened to John and myself. I left my job and packed my bags, determined to find answers. As I reached the trail, the sky grew darker and the wind began to howl. I knew that I had to hurry if I wanted to make it back before nightfall. As I approached the lake, I could feel the presence of the figure, watching me and waiting for me. I reached the shore and saw the figure standing in front of me. I could see the red eyes glowing in the darkness. It reached out to me, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I froze in terror, but this time, I was prepared. I had a plan. I had a weapon. I pulled out a knife, and I stabbed the figure in the chest. The figure let out a scream and disappeared into thin air. I was relieved that it was over, but as I turned around, I saw my friend Rachel lying on the ground with a knife in her chest. I realized that the figure had taken the shape of Rachel to make me kill her. I fell to the ground beside her, and I knew that I was too late to save her. I was consumed by guilt and grief. I was sentenced to life in prison, haunted by the memory of that night. The image of the lake and the mysterious figure always lingered in my mind, and the guilt of what I had done to my friend.